Okay, well, we are back again this evening. It is good to see everybody. I know we got several who've already tuned in online. I'm sure we'll have a few more drop in as we get going. Looking forward to continuing along our class here on relationships. I am Mark Adams. I'm the preaching minister at the King's Crossing Church of Christ. And if you're one of our members, good to see you. If you are not someone who normally goes to our church, we're glad you decided to spend a little time with us, and hope we can make it worth your while. So for this evening, let's get into my slide content here. First of all, I want to mention that if you would like to get a text message reminder when class is going to happen, I try to send a group text out. Excuse me, not a group text. Those get kind of annoying, don't they? But with the Remind app, I will send you a text message that I will schedule to go out. Usually either at 6:30 or 6:45. Just kind of a extra little reminder to tune in at 7 for class. You can get that by going to the link here in the video, rmd.at/KC midweek. And if you'll go there, it's very easy to sign up and get those. I've got a decent sized group who I know get those text messages every week. And I would encourage you to do that if you'd like to know when more content is going to happen. I have been working on some ideas. We still got several weeks to go on the relationship stuff, but been working on some ideas for what we will do on Wednesday nights once we get through with this particular course. And a couple of those ideas are starting to come together well. And so I'll let you know about that in the upcoming weeks. But anyway, good to be here. Glad to continue along with what we're doing. And let me get, there we go. So I titled this class, You Are Great, We Are Great. And I titled it that. And what I'm thinking about is how if we get better or work at learning to appreciate the person we're connected to, if both of us make an effort at that, we can be pretty great. If I look for the best in you, you look for the best in me, and we try to keep that in focus, to reflect on that more, to focus on the good, then by focusing on how great I think you are or your positives, then ultimately we can become something better than we might have been otherwise. So that's my class title. I want to bring back up tonight. I'm going to be revisiting for the next few weeks a few concepts that I introduced previously. And tonight, specifically, I wanted to talk about what the Gottman Institute calls their four horsemen. They say that when these are present in a relationship, especially when you see all four present in a relationship, I guess you could say all these things, we all have moments, right? Like we all have bad evenings, we all have rough days, but if these four visitors are starting to spend a lot of time in your household, that's major red flag. Need to do something, need to reconnect, need to get out of some obligation, but your marriage is in need of some serious repair attempts. And these things are all conquerable, but just the same. First would be criticism. Criticism, not just a complaint that says, hey, this is what happened, I found that really frustrating, could you do this instead? Criticism is more like, oh, you never get anything right, or you always do this, or, just stuff that you can't really get around. But criticism would be one. Contempt, where you just kind of openly express disdain for the other person. Eye rolling is pretty synonymous with contempt. Defensiveness, where I often would use defensiveness to try and play kind of the victim card. Like, you're always so hard on me. You never give me a break. You never like anything that I do. A lot of times we use defensiveness as a way to, it's kind of a passive aggressive way to push back. And then of course, stonewalling is where I just go numb. I quit talking. We don't solve the issue. We just disconnect entirely. All four of those are not desirable behaviors to have regularly. But with what we're talking about tonight, it is especially contempt that I think we are trying to work against. So the problem of kind of thinking bad of your partner, dwelling on what you think bad about them, expressing that, embodying that. But I tell you, it's just not a fun place to be in life when there's someone who is expressing contempt for you. And I know there are plenty of people who are more thick-skinned than I am, but I've always had a hard time with that. If I I sincerely do try to be kind to people. I don't need everyone to agree with me or like everything that I do, but something about receiving contempt, which just says like, either I think you're a bad person or um, you know, you're just not worth much, or I don't really value you, usually expressed much more harshly than that. But contempt to me is something that does, I don't know about you, it does get under my skin. I don't appreciate it. I don't see a lot of value for it, certainly not in a church setting. But contempt is what we're going to be trying to avoid and push back on with some of what we're talking about tonight. So I want to talk about the antidote for contempt. So if contempt is a matter of reflecting on and openly expressing disdain for this person you're in a relationship with, how can we move in the opposite direction of that? And in fact, I'm going to be sharing some of my thoughts on this, but I want to go ahead and invite you, if I were to just pull you aside, if someone pulled you aside and said, hey, in my relationship right now, we're getting to where we really feel a lot of contempt for each other. If you were to prescribe something that that person ought to do to work on their relationship, what would you suggest as an antidote to contempt, right? If you could come up with something, if contempt is the problem, how do we heal that, fix that, move past that, modify that behavior? What would be your antidote for contempt? So take a couple seconds. I know it's not always fun to type those comments out with your thumbs if you're using a smartphone, or maybe you're on a laptop or something, but I'd like to hear from you. What do you consider to be an antidote for contempt? Also, as you're thinking and typing about that, I just want to mention, if you're just tuning in, we are here every Wednesday night. I have a live Wednesday night class every week. We're here from 7 to 8 p.m. I've mentioned previously in this recording, and I'll mention again at the end, how you can get text message reminders. But we're here both on Facebook Live and also on our YouTube channel. And in fact, if you're a gamer, we're live on Twitch as well. We have a Twitch channel. So if you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. But a lot of people like to use that format as well. So we're trying to make ourselves available where the people are. So would encourage you to like our fan page, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and make sure you stay tuned to every week as we do this. So I want to look at a few scriptures as we get going on this. So thank you, Crystal. So I got one comment coming in on this. What do we do about this problem of contempt? So Crystal says joy and thankfulness. And so yes, those are two good things. What is it that makes me joyful? What is it that I can be thankful for? Sherilyn says, to cure my contempt for another, I would put myself in the other person's shoes and try to understand their point of view. That's a good approach, Cheryl. And you know, I think that there's a degree in which I can do that just within my imagination, right? Like sometimes someone might react to me a way that I don't think they should have, or you know, for whatever reason, another person disappoints me. And to an extent, I'm able to go there in my head and think, well, this is what they've been through in the last few months, or this is what I know their work must be like right now. And these are some of the things about their background or their upbringing that are just so different than mine. You know, to an extent, I can go there on my own. But if you're really having a problem with someone and you can't get there by just your sheer imagination power, that's a great conversation to have with someone. I have a friend named Jared Robinson who preaches for a church in Abilene, and his dad was also a minister. And he was talking about one time he had a church member that was just really up in arms about something. It was one of those, you know, hey preacher, I need to have lunch with you or something. And, you know, he's expecting, you know, this guy's really going to grill him over some, you know, whatever he's mad about. And Jared was sharing how, you know, like we all have that instinct where we kind of want to get defensive or argue or kind of think of how I'm going to go on the counterattack depending on what this person brings up. His dad gave him a bit of advice, which was tell this person whatever their problem is, go ahead and put it in writing. Like whatever it is they're wanting you to study, to read, you know, print me articles, write me your summary, copy and paste Bible verses, but whatever it is you really think that you've got this problem with me, go ahead and like get that for me so that I can really engage with it. And then his dad suggested, once you get there, get that stuff from the person, thank them for it, and then make kind of a pastoral move and say, hey, help me know, like, what's it like to be you lately? How are things going in your life? How have you been? Catch me up on you. And Jared talked about how that type method went such a long way in helping him to work very well with someone who he thought was coming to give him quite a tongue lashing over something they were upset about. So taking an active interest in just, hey, what is it like to be you? What's going on from your point of view? I think that's a good advice, Cheryl, and with some effort. Like, it's not my favorite thing to do. I'm sure it's not most of our favorite thing to do, to try to talk to someone we know has a problem with us or we think might have a problem with us. But trying to stay connected and to caring enough specifically to figure out, like, what's it like to live inside your head and in your life and in your house. Those things go a long way. This is good. Thank you, Sandy. Maybe set aside time to talk, share the things we appreciate about each other. Very good. Very good. Definitely going to say more about that. My good friend Will Brown says, focused on what they do right. Absolutely. We're going to talk some tonight about focus, and that's a big thing. What do we focus on? Yeah, empathy, Joe. I think empathy is kind of another way of saying what Cheryl was getting at, that not just that I want to feel pity for the other person, but I really want to try and understand what it feels like to be them. So empathy, good trait to develop. Incidentally, one of the best ways to develop empathy as a younger person is to read books. So if you can get your kids reading whatever they're interested in, if they're experiencing lots of stories and get in the habit of experiencing life in another person's world through another person's perspective, reading stories, wonderful way to develop empathy skills as you're growing up, especially. So, all right, so I've got a few scriptures I wanted us to look at together. And as we go, I just want you to weigh in on why you think this scripture might have some bearing on this conversation. How do we find the antidote to contempt? What can we do to push the other direction? Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. I know we have a tendency to talk about how we say things like, I lost my temper, as if I don't have any control over my emotional sense of being. But what's the truth? We don't always, emotions happen, right? And it's okay to experience them and feel them. And a lot of times they can be enlightening for us. But as far as our heart, and as our heart is connected to our thinking, our mind, we can guard it. We can guide it towards certain things. But I'm wondering, as you look at that passage, what might you say is valuable about guarding our hearts? Jesus said something similar, didn't he? Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. It's what's going on the inside that bubbles over into what comes out. So very important that you are putting good things in, because eventually whatever you put in is what's also going to come out. But yeah, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Interesting to me if you have any thoughts on that passage or how that might be useful. Feel free to keep commenting on that. Second one I wanted to look at with you, 1 Thessalonians 3:12. May the Lord make your love increase and overflow for each other and for everyone else, just as ours does for you. One of the great things about love, especially God's love, is that quite unlike so many other things in the world, love is not something that has only a finite amount available. Isn't it amazing how we can have great love for each other, but by giving our love away, by sharing our love, the total amount of love only increases. It's not by me giving you some love that therefore my bank is diminished, but in fact, when I give you love and you give me love, both of us see our overall stash increase, right? So I thought that was an interesting thing for Paul to be praying, that God would make their love increase and overflow. So when it comes to love, just as Jesus has said, love needs to be something that's always increasing. We don't ever need to hold back on letting that grow. Got a couple of other comments here. Yeah. More likely that we find our temper. Thank you, Brenda. Yeah, we don't lose it. We find it, right? Forgiveness is so important. We have to keep forgiveness in our heart. Jesus set some real high standards on that, didn't he? Jesus is the one who said, people always just quote the first part of this passage, and to me, it's the second part that's more interesting. He says, "Judge not, lest you be judged." And people quote that as a way of saying, basically, mind your own business. But what he says is, for with the measure you use, it'll also be measured out to you. And so this is a hard thing. And even in the Lord's Prayer, Jesus taught us to pray, "Lord, forgive us our sins," or "forgive us our trespasses," or "as we forgive those who sin against us. We forgive those who trespass against us." The Lord's Prayer, what we're taught to say to God is, "God, please give me the same kind of forgiveness that I give to everyone else." Boy, that's hard, isn't it? Because I don't really always want to be that merciful towards the people who I think have wronged me. Like if I feel righteous in my indignation, then it's easier not to want to let go of it. But that's something we've got to do, Sandy, because yeah, if we hang on to bitterness, for one, it just makes us miserable and it's a burden for us to carry. Lots of the time, the person we're mad at doesn't even like know that we're mad at them or doesn't care. Like it weighs us down more than it weighs them down that we're irritated. Frankly, it gives them a lot of free rent in our head. It gives them kind of a sense of control over us because I'm letting my emotions be beholden to this other person and how I feel about them. But forgiveness, just choosing, not that you can forget things, but just choosing not to make an issue of things that you can let go of, to acknowledge this was wrong. I wasn't okay with it. Wish you hadn't done it. If they apologize, thank you for apologizing. But we have to be able to let stuff go, especially in relationships, because if you start piling up all the things that bug you, all the things you've ever experienced that are wrong, you can make a pretty big pile very quickly, can't you? Hello, McCain's. Thank you, Ann. Expect to find good in everyone. And I have always been a big fan of Dale Carnegie, his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I know that's been one of the all-time, I think it's kind of like the original self-help book. And Dale Carnegie sometimes gets a bad rap in that some people have gotten really good at using people techniques, but they do it basically for self-aggrandizement and to be manipulative. But he'll always talk about the importance of taking a sincere interest in other people. And something I have kind of adopted, I don't know that I can say it's my life motto, but when I meet people that I don't know, especially just like total strangers, I try to always remind myself that every person is in some way my superior, as he says it. Not meaning that I'm like the worst of the worst and everyone's better than me, but what that means is, to your point, there's something good in everyone. And even if it's not something apparently good or enjoyable, there's something maybe they're talented in, there's something they could teach me, and even if perhaps through means of a bad example. Like I could benefit from any person if I were looking for a way to benefit from them. So yeah, I think that's a good comment. Thank you, Ann. All right, so letting our love increase to overflow. I wanted to reference Proverbs 31. I do not want to read the whole chapter. In fact, I guess it only starts, what is it, around verse 10 is where you move into the woman of noble character stuff. But if you're not familiar with that chapter in Proverbs 31, man, it's like the crowning chapter of the book. I'm sure Kevin's going to have some stuff to say about it in upcoming weeks in his Sunday afternoon class. But what you find in this is a description of, like this, I will say sort of idealized, virtuous woman. Definitely not the case. I mean, there's some ways in which looking at this model, I think, could give you some anxiety because, like, who can really live up to this kind of standard? But just the same, in striving for excellence, even if we don't arrive at like what we think is the fullest idealization of that, something very healthy about striving towards good, right? So there are 32 verses praising the good characteristics of this virtuous woman. And what I like about it is so many of them are centered around her actions. So the comments and compliments aren't just like, well, she's pretty or she's smart or whatever she is. Instead, it's like, watch her early in the morning and this is what you'll find her doing. Watch her late in the evening. This is what you'll find her doing. This is what it's like to have her around your house. This is what it's like to see her out in the marketplace. These are the things that she does. So it's a very action-oriented, I guess you'd call it kind of a poem, right? But I like the way that it's all couched in terms of action. And then getting near the end of the chapter, Her children arise and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive, and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Honor her for all that her hands have done, and let her works bring her praise at the city gate. So there's a lot of great stuff just in those few verses about giving honor to whom honor is due. I like the family dynamic here. Do you see that, where you've got children and husband, and you get the impression that they probably all have a habit of speaking well of each other and being fond of each other. I'm kind of a weird person in that I'm not given much to overstatement. I try to say most of the time precisely what I mean to say. So I'm sure sometimes it has been a source of frustration to some people in my life that I don't give like compliments that are hyperbole. Like, I was always resistant to telling like either of my parents, like, you're the greatest dad in the world or you're the best mom in the world, because my thinking process was, how is it categorically even possible to know that? And what does that even mean, right? So I've always been way too literal, but I see some value here in the way that they just kind of say, many women do noble things, but you're the best. And whether or not that's objectively true, people like myself should not get so hung up on that, because as far as he's concerned, what other woman does he need? She's the best for him, and he loves what she does, and he praises her. You get the impression that not only does he say nice things to her at home, which is great, but it's like even out at the city gate. The city gate is like the central hub of where everyone is. So now here we are on Facebook Live, which is like the modern equivalent to what the city gates would have been back then, where people are just kind of hanging around on here. And at the places where people hang out, what's he say about his wife? He doesn't complain about her. He's saying good things about her. He brags on the good work that she does, all that she's capable of. I think the positive language here is something to pick up on. And even putting it in perspective there in verse 30, charm can be deceptive. People can be manipulative. Beauty is fleeting, but someone who fears the Lord, a woman who fears the Lord, and for that matter, a husband who fears the Lord, if you found that, you've actually found a good thing and not something you should take lightly or just be anxious to move on from. Thank you, Randall. That's helpful. You're the best parents I've ever had. That would be a good change up. Yeah, I have always, much of my life, probably been too literal of a person, but that's one of my quirks. So we've all got them, right? But yeah, you're the best one I've had. All right. One other I mentioned from Hosea. We studied this a couple of months ago when we were doing Minor Prophets. Therefore, I am now going to allure her. God is speaking of Israel as if she's, his spouse. He says, I will lead her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. To me, there's some wisdom here about, let's say that we want to kind of reconnect, to allure your spouse, to try and charm them once again, to fall in love with them all over again. At least in God's method here, some of that seems to involve pulling away from all the stresses, getting somewhere where you can get a clearer mind, a clearer head, and see things better for what they are. But we're going to go out to the wilderness. We're going to have some time away, and I will speak tenderly. Important to have spaces in your life where you can feel like you've pulled back from things, where you've got kind of a safe zone where you can really be yourself, not be paranoid, not be stressed, and to be tender and gentle with each other. But that seems, in God's mind at least, to be part of how you allure the other person. So again, we're trying to push back on contempt. Actively trying to allure your spouse would be a much better move than the move of contempt. Okay, anybody know who this guy is? Y'all seen this guy in the commercials? Captain Obvious, right? So here's what I think is an obvious statement, but maybe so obvious that it needs to be stated. People who are happily married like each other. Brilliant insight, right? If you're happily married to each other, it probably needs to involve you actually liking each other. And amazing how we can get so busy and overcommitted that we could lose sight of that very fundamental Just basic truth. If we're going to enjoy our marriage, we should work on finding ways to like each other, connect with each other, and to grow, in Paul's words, to kind of grow our love for each other. But want to be happily married? Do things that will make your spouse like you, and look for things in your spouse that you like. Plain and simple. There's a really brief summary of some of what we will talk about. Here's another thing that I mentioned a few weeks ago, and in fact, back to Will's point. What is your focus? We should focus on what another person does right. We should focus on what we like about them, because your focus will determine your reality. This is true in a lot of different ways. So, have y'all ever like gone through a phase? Like I recently had to purchase a vehicle, and like you might think to yourself, I don't remember the last time I saw like whatever it is, a red Ford Taurus. I don't know, like whatever, like a red car or something. And you tell yourself, I don't feel like I've seen many of those lately. And then you drive around, and all of a sudden, you start seeing them everywhere. Or I've had the experience that throughout high school and college, I never worked fast food, but I had several different retail jobs. And really, not surprisingly, whatever type store I happened to be working at, lo and behold, sooner or later, I ended up buying some of the stuff that we sold. Now, my dream job was in high school, where I worked at a guitar store, and I got deep discounts on all the gear that we sold. So I still today use a lot of the stuff I bought when I was in high school, because I just got it for such a good price. But that was also true when I worked at a software store, when I worked at a jewelry store. Whatever it is that you're focusing on much of the time, that kind of becomes the world that you live in. And so your focus will determine your reality. And as we talked earlier about your heart, like some emotions you're just going to feel, but by choosing what you focus on, you might be able to shape your emotional well-being more than you think you can. So your focus determines your reality. Think about what you focus on. All right. So as we keep moving into some of this, I wanted to ask another question for you. In your life, what compliment has been especially meaningful to you? This could be from your spouse. This could be from an employer, from a customer. But I think you know what I'm talking about. Like, I hope in your life you've had the experience of getting a few very meaningful compliments, like the kind of compliment that stays with you, that you remember, or maybe even fills your cup for weeks at a time, not just a couple of hours. When someone has said something to you that has just totally filled your cup, you can be humble if you want. You don't have to tell us what it is the person complimented about you, but anything you could say about what made that compliment so meaningful to you. When someone has used their words and really built you up, what has made that work? So in your life, what compliment has been especially helpful? What has stayed with you? I think there's some good insight in there for us in what we're going to say to each other as we go. So again, glad to have you weigh in on that question. I will be monitoring for comments. The antidote, as the Gottman Institute would approach the problem of contempt, they would say the antidote to contempt is nurturing your fondness and admiration for each other. Getting back to Captain Obvious, people who are happily married like each other. And to Paul's point, we want our love to grow. We want our fondness to grow. We want our admiration to grow. And whereas contempt is kind of a way of saying you're worthless, or I resent you, or I don't think you're worth anything, this is moving the opposite of that, right? Like, I like you, I find you interesting, and wow, there's some things you do that are just really special and I look up to. Like, you do that better than I do that, and I respect you for it. So how do we nurture fondness and admiration? That's nice. Thank you, Kathy. When Abe tells me the house is happy when I'm home, that is a great compliment. So what is the Kathy Garcia effect on her household? It is a happy effect. When Kathy's around, everyone's happier. That's a very great compliment. I would agree. And so if anybody's taking notes on like what's something I could say to a person to make them feel good, that's a good one. I'll throw this out too, just as something to try. This is something that could certainly work for, your spouse or your significant other, but I've found if you want to promote a really healthy environment in your larger family, at our church, in your workplace, you know how gossip is especially hurtful. Like when you find out what someone's saying about you when you're not present, you assume they're being especially honest. So it's one thing for someone to say to your face, you're just dumb or whatever, but at least they're saying it to your face. But when you find out someone was talking to another person behind your back saying, wow, this person is just a real moron. Um, those kinds of things are especially hurtful, I think. The good news is compliments work, I think, just as effectively as gossip does. Like it's one thing for me to say something nice to you, but if you really want to make another person feel good about themselves, rather than complimenting them directly, tell someone else what you like about that person. And a lot of times it does get back to them. And just the way you would assume gossip is an honest portrait of what that person thinks, hearing about, I would call it like positive gossip, compliments behind your back, those are also especially meaningful, aren't they? So I would just throw that in there and say that's one thing you can do. Um, yes, Cheryl, thanks for sharing that. Someone at my job once told me, with you, Cheryl, so the computer term is WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. They use that as an acronym. What you see is what you get. They indicated that they believed I was a genuine person with no deception, and I have tried to live up to that. I like that terminology too, Cheryl, where you say, I have tried. Like, here's a nice thing someone said, and it gave you something to live up to. We're going to return to that idea in a few minutes. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And that's also nice to feel like people believe that you are not a false person or a deceptive person, but that you're open and honest. That's a nice compliment as well. So here's one thing to try. As often as possible, and I'm talking like, I don't really think you can wear this one out too easily, because most of us could use a good deal more positivity in our lives. But as often as possible, try to say things that begin with phrases like this: thank you for whatever it is. I like that you, whatever it is. I appreciate you for, whatever that might be. I have found that for us in, the early stages of parenthood that we're in, I have tried to use that top prompt a few times. And if I'm being really honest, there have been a couple of times that I started off with that phrase, not even sure what else was going to come out of my mouth. But it's like, okay, I need to make sure I show appreciation. So thank you for, and something always does come to the surface. But getting in the habit of expressing appreciation, expressing thanks, expressing admiration, that goes a long way in erasing some of the problems of, like, I don't know what you're thinking. Like, especially, like, I tend to be a person who lives in my head too much, and I'm not always very verbal around the house. Trying to make sure I articulate the good things that I think. So, my blank stare may not be taken as just, what is he thinking? You need to actually tell people what you think, especially if you're thinking good things. I admire this about you. I really like that you did that. I really appreciate that you did that when I know you didn't have to. That meant a lot to me. It made me feel good. But as often as possible, try to say things that begin with phrases like that. Again, I'm more than happy to hear your tips as well on nurturing fondness and admiration. I'll also say this. When you're trying to change what you are like as a person, I want to clarify what I mean by this, but I think it is totally fine to fake it until you make it. And what I mean by that is when you are trying to live a different kind of life or change your approach as a spouse, as a parent, as a coworker, doing something really different might not feel like it's authentically you at first. It's like, maybe I am too negative of a person. Maybe I do tend to focus on the bad. And as I'm trying to change my habits to be good, I might feel like, am I being a little bit of a faker when I'm saying the compliments when in my head there were 15 insults that actually went in there too? I think that with behavior, go ahead and do the thing that you wish you were doing. Just like the Proverbs 31 woman, maybe she didn't always feel like working so hard or getting up so early or staying up so late. But in the end, actions carry a lot of weight, don't they? So I would encourage you to go ahead with your actions and try to be like the person you're envisioning yourself becoming. And I bet your life and reality will catch up to it. So I'm not suggesting be a fake person. I am suggesting, even if your heart and your attitude are struggling to get there, go ahead and do the good thing. And a lot of times the rest of you will catch up to it. Hey, this is so Kathy, you're kinder than many of us, because I know the approach that says when I'm really mad at someone, like Abraham Lincoln famously has done this a couple of times, write a really nasty letter and then just don't let yourself send it. Come back to it the next day and you might discover you're not that mad. So what Kathy does instead is when I'm really angry, I will write a sweet note to him, and it turns my attitude around and makes me forget what made me so angry. That's a much nicer approach, isn't it? Because sometimes people find those nasty letters eventually when you write them. So yeah, write a really nice note. So by sitting down and writing things that are good, things that are positive, that's helpful, Kathy. So it does for you help to get into a better frame of mind and to start focusing on the positive. Okay, thank you for your honesty. Yes, I've done that one as well. Okay, so we've tried the angry note approach. I think the sweet note is probably a better method. Yeah, the appreciation we show to others depends on what we expected from them in the first place. I hate to say this, but the less we expect, the more we appreciate what we do get. Randall says this. Randall, I had a friend growing up named Daniel, and Daniel, I don't really think he is a pessimist, but he would always say he's a pessimist. And he said the advantage of being a pessimist is that you're either always right or you're pleasantly surprised. I've always thought that was clever. Maybe not entirely the best way to live, but I would put it this way, Randall. I think that when we place expectations on people, a few weeks ago we talked about when you're looking for someone you might want to start a relationship with. We talked about from the Van Epp book, How to Avoid Falling in Love with a Jerk. We talked about those little dials where you need to know someone before you trust them, before you rely on them, before you commit to them, that kind of thing. I think maybe to your comment, that has some value, because there are people in my life, certainly my coworkers. I don't know if y'all have noticed, but man, we've got a really killer staff at church right now. I'm just so happy with the work that everybody's doing. And especially during COVID, it has been so difficult on everyone, having to kind of reinvent so many things. And even just this last week, once the power came on and Justin had this great idea of opening up the church, and everyone just kind of jumped in and sprang into action. I've really come to appreciate all that. But I've learned that, like, at least with a lot of my coworkers, I can depend on them for a lot, and I can expect a lot out of them. Because they consistently deliver that. And sometimes when they can't, I'm, want to be gentle. I want to be understanding. And, the relationships we build with each other help us to get through that. But I think when you've gotten to know someone and you've learned that you can trust them, it's not bad to have some expectations for people. But at the same time, I know persons in my life who struggle perpetually with putting people on pedestals and expecting way too much out of people. And yes, so if what you're doing is that, where I expect the world from you every time, and you're just not able to always deliver that, rather than seeing you as a human being, I start to kind of insult you. I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago in my sermon about the youth kid who, he and his grandmother showed up angry because they were at some other church where, the youth minister kind of had disappointed him. And he was telling me, oh, but you're the most amazing youth minister I've ever met. And this is the best church I've ever been to. And, paying these, very, as I mentioned, I don't tend to go for hyperbole in compliments. And so as he starts to just dump all these very kind words on me, I'm also going, okay, so you are mad at the last guy for I'm not even sure what. And you are telling me that I am the best of all time. And it sounds like the first time I don't live up to that, you're going to get frustrated with me. I didn't articulate all that. You just accept the compliment. But I hate to say it, but I was totally right about that one. It wasn't but about 2-3 years later where I went from being the best ever to, man, this guy's not worth anything and doesn't love me, doesn't support me. Not true at all. I had really done more for this kid, frankly, than I had for quite a few of my other kids. But yeah, people people who put others on pedestals can get very frustrated. So important to allow, especially in a marriage, you got to allow your spouse to be a real person. That was my point last week when I talked about the guy with the picture frames. Rule 1 and rule 2. Rule 1 is people are jerks. Rule 2 is God loves and works through people, and so should I. Some of the time, everybody disappoints you, and so yeah, I think getting trying to be realistic in the expectations we place on people, and sometimes that's even a helpful thing to ask. Like rather than just asking for a favor, saying, "Hey, here's kind of what I'm needing." Is what part of this, if any, would you be open to helping with, or what can I realistically expect from you? That's a good thing to talk about rather than to assume. Let's see, Sandy, like you, I used to be very nonverbal, but I started pushing myself to initiate conversations with people. Now it comes very easily to me. I faked it until I made it. That's good, Sandy. That was kind of what my time in college was like, because my high school friends would all say I think that I was friendly, but I considered myself shy. And so being from Nashville, Tennessee, and going to school 6 hours away in Searcy, Arkansas, where I didn't know anyone, I was regularly pushing myself to talk to people I didn't know. Sometimes I would look for a table at the cafeteria that, like, there'd be one seat open and I didn't know anyone at the table, and I would just ask if I could sit there and try to talk to them. A couple of times that was disastrous. A lot of times I made some good friends out of it. Yeah, thank you for sharing that example, Sandy. But I do think that's true. Just start trying to act like the person you wish you were, and you might discover that you can get there quicker than you think you can. So that's what I have to say about faking it till you make it, and hopefully that makes sense. We talked about building love maps last week. I think also taking time to rehearse and retell the story of how you fell in love. I think it's this way for most people. You ask them their question. How did you guys get together? What's the story of how he proposed to you? What's the story of how you really came together? What's the story of your marriage? You ask those kinds of stories about falling in love, and there's always like this twinkle in the people's eyes, isn't there? We all kind of like talking about our story because I think every person wrestles with, am I ever going to find the right person, and who is that going to be? And when that happens for you, it's a precious thing, isn't it? But one thing you can do to nurture your fondness and admiration is actually just to sit around and talk about the good old days, or even with another couple. Man, let you go and they go, but let both of you share your story together. And it's amazing how quickly you can kind of dive back into some of the early fondness, infatuation, or, oh yeah, this is what I admired about him. This is what I loved about her. This is what made him so different than the others. This is what is just mind-blowing about her and what she's capable of. But rehearsing the story of how you fell in love, pretty hard to do that without feeling at least a little bit of fondness for each other. Hard to be contemptuous when you are thinking about what it was that drew you to each other to begin with. I think that's valuable, something else you can try. So, Cheryl, you made a comment earlier about someone giving you a compliment and then you tried to live up to it. So you kind of answered my question, but I'm interested in hearing from the rest of you. Have you seen anyone become a self-fulfilling prophecy? I do believe that children tend to be self-fulfilling prophecies. I think it's true to a large extent for adults as well, because you shared your own example there, Cheryl. But the way that you talk about a person, often they will try to live into. I feel so bad for young children whose teachers in the elementary school all will gossip about how bad this kid is. And so this child might show up in your classroom, and before you've ever met him, you already think bad of him and just assume he's going to get in trouble a lot. And a lot of times your actions will follow suit with what you assume. And because of how you approach them, therefore, maybe he fulfills that and he is rambunctious and acts up or talks out more, whatever that is. But I did one of the places where I did ministry. There was a mother who, as her children were growing up, I must have heard her say 300 times, well, one of these days they'll be teenagers, and teenagers just give you trouble. Well, guess what her teenagers did, right? So the way that you talk about people, they will tend to live into. So important that we make a habit of thinking through the words that we use and the way we describe each other. Getting back to Proverbs 31, when you have a spouse that compliments you and tells others what good they think you're capable of, not just because you don't want to disappoint them, but like you'd like to think that you're a respectful person and someone who has something to offer. But yeah, letting someone becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy where you talk about them as if they're going to be a certain kind of thing, and a lot of times we do live into that. I think it's very important. Yeah, teacher expectations and student actions. Yeah, getting a couple of comments coming in, but okay. So I've got time to share this example. This is something that amazed me at the Old Hickory Church of Christ, and I may have shared this before. I don't remember, but back during the 1960s, 50s, 60s, this is before congregations generally got to be big. Like these days, it's common to find mega churches and churches with several thousand people and multi-site campuses. This is like way before all that. But Old Hickory had like 900 members back before churches got that big. And they had this huge group of people. But the amazing thing about them was that they produced, I don't remember the number of preachers and missionaries, but Philip Slate ended up doing research on Old Hickory and like writing an article about them in Restoration Quarterly, which is like our movement's one of our top scholarly journals. But they really are noteworthy in how they succeeded in raising up so many people to be preachers and missionaries. And the other point that we all aren't sure about is like not just what the young men grew up to do, but how many of these young women grew up to be spouses of people who did a lot of these things. But there are many other churches that got planted because of people who grew up at this congregation. And while I was working there, I really tried to dig into it some, like talking to the older folks. Okay, you talk about the glory days back when we had 900 people. We don't have that anymore, but tell me about the glory days. What was it like? What was going on? Who was there? What were they doing? And the clear theme that emerged rapidly was that the elders especially used to make regular time to drop by the children's Bible classes and would just go around the room and would say things like, you know what? And they knew their names and they knew the kids, learned their names. Sue, I think one day you're going to grow up and I bet your husband's going to be a preacher. And Ralph, I think you're going to be a missionary. And Andrew, I think one day you're going to be a minister and you're going to be a leader. And they just kept speaking these ideas into these children's heads. Lo and behold, it stuck. Like it stuck. And I know that like they had good classes and they had a culture of, pushing each other and excellence and commitments. Like there's a lot of pieces to this, but when I took the time to do the research on this, but the clear answer that I came away with was the power of speaking into a person's life, the future that you wish for them. And again, I don't know the numbers, but it was a phenomenal, like dozens of pretty prominent ministers all raised through this one era at this church. But when you have a culture of speaking those things to each other, people like to live up to their compliments. So something to hang on to, something to think about. Savoring the good. This is something we want to work on. Just the way you can sit there and I don't know if y'all do this, but it's like I might be driving home or in the bathroom, like shaving or something, and I'll just rehearse in my head some stupid thing I did when I was like 14 and feel embarrassed about it all over again. You can kind of ruminate on the bad things, but giving yourself deliberate space to savor the good things, especially with your spouse, when they've got a good story, like, hey, something really good happened at work today, or hey, someone did this really nice thing, or hey, here's something I like that you did. When you got a positive thing, push through the negatives and work through them. But when you got a positive thing, take your time with it. And so when the spouse comes home and says, hey, I just got offered a promotion, or this really cool deal came through, or had a really good day at school today, you want to ask all these kinds of questions. Really, I want to hear all about it. So who was there? Who was the first person that told you something? And what did they say? And when they said that, what did that feel like for you? And what face did you make? And what face were they making? And who else heard that? And how did they respond? And what else happened? Just walk through every step. Just relive it to the full extent that you can. And then also ask the question, like, what do you think helped this to be so good? This was such a good day for you. What helped it to be good? Like, latch onto the good stuff and savor it and chew on it and keep talking about it, and don't move on like till you've just really, really tried to relive it. But just the way that rehearsing your story of falling in love is good, anytime you've got a positive thing beyond just a nice compliment to really relive, wow, this is what you did and this is how it made me feel, and I just loved when you said this is what what my heart did, and just trying to really savor the good things. Yes, thank you, Cheryl. The way the patriarchs would bless their children. I took part in a blessing for a young man at my church in Arkansas. His family had this tradition where they would actually speak a word of blessing over their children when they graduated high school. And I mean, we do that also to an extent with our senior Sundays. But in addition to like having a senior day, they had their own family party, and all the family came together, and they had a good prepared statement. They would read over the child and pray for them, and something super healthy about that. Like, what do we wish for you as a family? We're not going to leave that to assumption. I'm going to tell you exactly what I wish for you and all the good I wish for you, and frankly, the ways I hope God defeats you if you turn on him and brings you back to himself. Just really kind of laying all that out in sort of an Old Testament fashion. It's good. I think not a bad practice. Another thing I want to suggest as a way to nurture fondness and admiration. We are talking about our thinking, right? Earlier, we talked about the passage of your heart, like it's what comes out of your heart. It's what you put into your heart that will come out of your heart. You have to guard it carefully. But we do want to learn to think more positively. As I mentioned, this is one of the resources I'm using a lot. It's got some green on the cover, which is why it's showing up purple. But the 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work from the Gottmans. They have, in this particular chapter, a breakdown of, I believe it is, how many weeks? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They've got a 7-week challenge where every day there's a simple task to do followed by an action. I think this is valuable. And so if the problem is you tend to think badly of your spouse, or you tend to think badly of your partner, you kind of start with your thoughts, and then you have an action that accompanies those thoughts. And this is not that dissimilar from what you were talking about, Kathy, in writing a sweet note. So like the thought for week 1 on Monday is, I am genuinely fond of my partner. So that's your prompt. I am genuinely fond of my partner. And the action they give is, list 1 characteristic you find endearing or lovable. So you've written it down, you've thought about it, you focused on something positive. Week 3 on Monday, the thought is, my home is a place to come and get support and reduce stress. Then the task is, list a time when your spouse helped you reduce stress. So they've got a bunch of different ones, and I see a lot of value in that sort of approach. I think you would find you wouldn't even have to get to the end of the 7 weeks. I think you could get about 3 days into that and already see some positive benefit to what's a positive thing I want to focus on, and what's a time that my spouse embodied that positive thing. And as opposed to keeping a list of wrongs like 1 Corinthians 13 talks about, pretty soon you'd have a list of positives. And the added benefit of that is, when you can really reflect on what are some things my spouse has done right that I do love and appreciate and value and admire, you get that list. What a cool thing to share with each other, where here's a big long list of all the things I like about you. That would go a long way for me. And being able for them also to say, oh, I had no idea when I did that little thing, I had no idea that action affected you as much as it did. Like the fact that you're still thinking about it and even wrote it down. Wow, I had no idea. I'll do that more. So they do more things that you appreciate, and it is therefore easier to appreciate them more. So that's part of how love and admiration grow. Let's see. Yeah, I am just about to the end of my content. So if you got any other thoughts, comments, feel free to toss those in before I close out this broadcast. I would remind you again, if you enjoy this class, this content, would love to have you like this video, like our fan page, share this on your wall, send it to a friend you think would benefit from it. Again, it's on Facebook, but if your friends are not on Facebook, all this content is also available live on our YouTube channel at King's Crossing Church of Christ. And if you want to get the text message reminders, I've got those at rmd.at/KC midweek. And Yeah, appreciate everyone being here. As always, if you've got questions, ideas, thoughts, you want to challenge me on something, whatever that is, feel free to shoot me an email and I will get back to you as soon as I can. If there's not anything else, I'm going to go ahead and close us out with a word of prayer. God, we are grateful that you send people our way to love us and support us and encourage us, especially, Lord, in our marriages. We pray that you would help us to always be nurturing our fondness and our admiration, because it truly is a precious thing to have a partner in life that we love and want to be with, and especially, Lord, if we find one that helps us to grow closer to you. Help us never to take such people for granted, but to help us always to be investing in the relationships we have with each other. Bless us, Lord. Thank you for our time together tonight, and it's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. All right. Y'all have a great rest of your evening, and Lord willing, we will see you all